welcome to the Parasite podcast, the second episode. If you haven't seen the first, my name is Jennie Colucci.
My name is Frankie Adeo.
My name is Anthony M. You're only getting half of my name.
Anthony will remain a mystery in this episode as well.
For the duration of our podcast, he will be remaining anonymous.
Yes. If you haven't seen our first podcast, we encourage you to go back and watch it. You'll get to know a little bit about us, how we formed, how we met each other, and we review evidence from our very first investigation at Whitehill Mansion, one of our favorite places. We encourage you to go back and watch that. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about technology. We're going to talk about old school technology, new school technology, revamped technology, the resurgence of old school technology. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. I know it's a big topic in the whole paranormal community, so hopefully we can add some new things to that conversation. Second, we are going to be reviewing evidence from our investigation at Kreischer Mansion in Staten Island. I know that was on my bucket list for so long to go to Kreischer Mansion, and I was thrilled to go. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's go right into it and start our talk about technology in paranormal investigation. I'd like to begin with Scooby-Doo.
Everywhere we look, Scoob, giggling green ghosts.
Let's begin with Scooby-Doo.
Yeah,
because
right.
To me, old school technology is very Scooby-Doo. We're talking about setting up traps, setting flour out on the floor, dowsing rods, pendulums, things like that come into play. But really, it's very Scooby-Doo. Like, how could we trap a ghost? How could we find evidence of it in a very physical way? So we can get into that. I know you've all used dowsing rods.
Right, yeah.
Right.
How was your experience with that?
I like dowsing rods a lot. The first time I'd used them was actually my very first real investigation over at the Shanley Hotel in upstate New York. One of the tour guides basically just put a set of dowsing rods in my hand and they were like, okay, go, do your thing. And I'm like, well, I don't know what my thing is. And I just started talking and asking questions, and we were getting responses. And it was one of those aha moments where it was just like, wow, this is working. This isn't me moving it. I'm trying to stay as steady as possible. And it was actually a piece of equipment that I was able to connect with very quickly. And I think that when it comes to using a lot of the tools that we have, I try to use them to facilitate communication more than anything else, as opposed to kind of using a lot of our tools for observation methods or things like that.
So the good thing about these tools is you have to have a connection. So the first thing you do is connect with a spirit, right? So the first question you ask is, hey, tell me what yes looks like. And you're immediately back and forth.
Right.
Instead of just, I'm filming you, right? I'm filming you, or, I'm detecting you on a laser grid or something like that. No, I'm actually connecting with you right away.
Yes. And the fact that it happens so quickly is pretty astonishing, actually. It's easy. It's very easy to connect with something and get that immediate gratification of getting some sort of results. And I just think that because, things like dowsing rods and pendulums, they're such an old school way of doing things that it seems like whatever's out there, whatever spirits we're communicating with, can easily pick it up.
Right. I have such I'm growing into learning a lot of those traditional methods because I love technology. So that kind of comes easy to me. Funny story, for the viewers, is when Jennie Anthony and I were in Hinsdale, I was like, you know what, let me just pick them up and let me see what it feels like, because I've always had I have a tremendous amount of respect for traditional methods because they are so intuitive, you also have to put intention into it. Right. So I really hold those really, like Jennie said, you can point and shoot a camera without intention. You know what I mean? But when you're using something like a pendulum or a dowsing rods, you have to have that connection. And it has to be genuine. It has to be really that deep connection. So I put the dowsing rods in my hands, and it was I was super tense, and Anthony's just Frankie, loosen up, and it was, but then I don't know if you guys remember, I quickly put them down because I felt Like, I was just caught up in what am I supposed to be doing with this?
Right.
That there was no real intention.
Right.
So, like, I put them down immediately and was like, I feel like a poser. So I'm just going to put them down for now. But they've been in my Amazon shopping cart for quite some time. And I haven't pulled the trigger on it just because I want to watch people do it more. I mean, we have an investigator, Stacy, that, we saw in White Hill,
Right.
and saw a great example of a session with dowsing rods. So, like, I want to learn from those people that do it the best. So when I do pull them out of my tech box, they are just as legitimate and just as resourceful as using some of that high tech stuff. So it's something that I'm learning from everybody, like who do use that as just equally as an effective method of investigation.
I have seen Stacy in action with the pendulum as well. Quite amazing. What would you guys say to somebody like me who's very skeptical, who would say, the first question a skeptic asks is, how can you say you're not moving them, kind of thing? I mean, there is a little bit of human error involved, right? So what would you say to that?
So my whole thing with this is, first off, whoever you're dealing with, you have to trust them to understand that they're not intentionally moving something. There has to be that trust. Get that out of the way first. The other thing is, okay, maybe small involuntary movements that you have are moving your dowsing rods, moving your pendulum, moving a planchette on a Ouija board or whatever it might be. But the thing is, you're still getting answers. You're still getting responses that coincide with whatever story or location that you're at. And a lot of the time, these answers are usually things that you don't know, or that you possibly couldn't know. So all these things, dowsing rods, pendulums, spirit boxes, digital voice recorders, I consider them all different methods of channeling. And those answers, I kind of view them as coming through you and going to that device. You are getting those answers through you, whether it be sort of through these involuntary movements or a piece of tech or whatever it might be. I think it's all still the same thing. It's all some type of channeling.
And the trust is a big deal. Like, for example, I know that Frankie or Anthony wouldn't say to me that I'm not moving it if they were moving it. I trust you, of course.
Right. And I think that Anthony brings up a good point. Is you have to, even like, we're talking about traditional methods and things like pendulums and stuff, but we have actual people who are on our team and that we work with, and that we pull in from outside resources and partnerships, that they are actually the vessel. They're the technology, they're that old school technology. And you have to have that trust, because you have to know, like, if they're saying, like, I'm feeling something, or I'm receiving a message or something like that, that trust is there. We talked about last episode about, like, Jennie being the skeptic and Anthony, being more open to different things, and me kind of like falling in the middle. I think that having that balance of not just us as a team, but when we bring in people like that, getting a true look at what paranormal investigation was like in, like, the beginning.
Right. And that brings me to something I was just thinking about, that whole Victorian, seances, things like that we could touch on as well, the whole spiritualism movement. And actually that leads into Kreischer very well, so we can talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, there was spirit photography and all that was quickly debunked, by a lot of educated people.
Right. I mean, we had Price, did a lot of that debunking of like some of those paranormal photographers back in the day that were using tricks and stuff like that to, to gain attention, that quickly he was able to debunk. But then I look at someone like Hans Holzer, and he utilized, like, the mediumship a lot in his work. That's a great example of, like, the trust, because that was his tool. That was, like, his go-to tool. He didn't have, like, he didn't have that. The technology just did not exist. So the mediums like Ethel and Sybil, they were like his his tools. So he really had to speak on what Anthony was saying, like that trust, that what they were giving him or what they were kind of like portraying during like an investigation or a session with him, that it was just as credible. I'm super fascinated by the whole spiritualism era, because without that, we would not be even having we wouldn't even have a team. They were the leaders of what we're doing now.
Sure.
And it's also amazing that we're still using those methods in combination with like high tech.
Right. I was just going to say, I mean, even if you're watching modern television shows about paranormal investigation, you're watching something like A Kindred Spirits, they're using a chip coffee. They're using, as a tool in addition to their technology.
Right.
Or, again, following the Holzer method. People are still using that method today, which is amazing.
Well, also going back to what you were saying with like a lot of the older spiritualism stuff, spirit photography, things like that, just things being debunked. I feel like with a lot of evidence that we pick up, a lot of those things can be debunked. But at the same time, you have to look at the circumstances under which those events happen. Like with the Fox sisters from the spiritualism movement, who basically started it. You had one sister towards the end who said, "Oh yeah, we were faking it the whole time."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, like shortly before she had passed, she actually rescinded everything she had said, and she was like, "No, actually, that was legit," because she felt pressured into saying that it was all faked at one point. So yeah, anyone can explain tapping or a knock on the wall. Yeah, that's easy to debunk.
Right.
But then when you're in investigation and you ask a spirit to knock or tap back in response, look at the circumstances surrounding it. It's still pretty interesting that it happened.
Again, we'll see that in Kreischer. So much of this we'll see later on in our own evidence that we're going to watch today.
Right.
So it's very relevant, very relevant.
Like I said, I'm super fascinated by it. And I know now we kind of look at things like seances and Ouija boards a lot different than we did back then. I think for true paranormal investigators and researchers, we almost look at that stuff where it has to come from somebody that really knows what they're doing.
Right.
Where, because we know things can open up and they cannot be closed properly. Investigators sometimes that don't look at that with a high regard do not understand the potential for really bad shit to happen.
Right.
And I am super fascinated because I think a lot of the times our locations where we're investigating, they lend to that type of investigation, some of the spiritualism stuff, because they just don't know the spirits, especially residual, that have no idea what a K2 meter is or an SLS camera. But they may
be afraid.
Right, they may be afraid, and they connect to something like a seance or a Ouija board because that's in the era, that's what was the tool, and that maybe have been used for a while. But like I said, I would love to get some of that stuff involved in what we do. Mm-hmm. However, Jennie, Anthony, and I always have conversations about this, and again, we don't always agree on things, right? And that's that's the beauty of things. But I think when we talk about stuff and incorporating some of this stuff in, we also know that it has to be done by somebody who really is experienced and has almost like a resume for doing something like this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they have to have a good track record.
We don't mess around with that. And we don't recommend any of you do it either.
Right.
Definitely.
Do not do this at home.
Exactly. Do not try this at home. Do not try this seance at home. It's interesting that things are coming back to me. Things like Polaroid cameras. You go to buy a Polaroid camera now and it says for paranormal investigation. Now we have all these digital cameras and everything, but now people want to go back to using cassette tapes and I know Anthony knows a little bit about that, but, Polaroid cameras, cassette tapes, things like that, that we're trying those older things again, not just old Victorian, but, older 70s, kind of thing.
Right.
Way before I was born. Not really. But Anthony, didn't you talk about recording EVPs once on a cassette recorder? I feel like you mentioned that.
I did. I mean, I really do like digital recorders. The issue with cassettes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just one of those things where I would have to sit down and try to weed out the false positives with the cassettes because they're mechanical pieces of equipment. you have motors in there. You have the actual reels of tape inside the cassette moving. There's a lot of moving parts in there, and something with such a sensitive microphone has a tendency to pick up those sounds. When you sit down and work with a cassette player long enough, you can kind of understand what would be an EVP versus mechanical noise. I just find that the convenience of a digital recorder is a lot easier. It's less bulk,
Sure.
it's less issues, less things to go wrong. On the flip side of it, because, I got to give both sides of this. Digital recording versus analog recording are two very different things. We talk about old school versus new school. Digital recording is still very new compared to analog recording. And I do feel like, just because of the way, and without making it too technical, analog recording, like recording on tape, is more responsive to the environment versus digital recording.
We talked a lot about it in episode 1 about like putting ourselves back into like almost time warping back to that time where we're trying to tap into where we know the history. We kind of have to time warp ourselves back into those situations where we have historical evidence. Maybe it's like an event that we specifically know what happened. I love to put ourselves back into that situation, and that we can't always do that with high tech. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, like, why would you want somebody like you're really trying to tap into? Even before spiritualism, a lot of this stuff was used for like way before that spiritualism kind of, it's been used for like centuries almost,
Right.
In different formats, like something like a dowsing rod. So it carried on through the years. So like, I love that we are looking to build that and develop that into everything that we do. I think it's super important, and love the fact that we have people again like Stacy, like Matt, and even we have an investigator who that's his tool, a pendulum is like, he's very comfortable with that. And I think when you find that balance of people that can do both, it just opens up the doorway for like so much stuff to be received.
Not to plug the hashtag, but it's science and sensitivity, and we truly do combine those two things.
It's more tools in the toolbox, do you want to have the toolbox that just has a screwdriver and a hammer, or do you want the toolbox that has the screwdriver, the hammer, the wrench, the ratchet set? They're all tools, and they all have different applications.
Right.
And I will probably say this every single podcast, but we are dealing with human beings. We are dealing with people. I'm not talking about an elemental or something like that here that we're connecting with. So if you're connecting with a human being, sometimes technology, you have to use older school things. The new stuff is really exciting. I think things that are coming out, things like the new laser grids and the G7, is it the laser grid, right? Something like that you can see where things are. That's pretty interesting. It's almost like you have a grid where you can see them creeping up on you. It's a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost like
weird.
like
they're
a ghost
coming closer.
radar.
Yeah, it is like radar. Yeah, exactly. But it's based on the whole laser grid, idea. So it's not so far fetched, but it's just a little easier to see. On a little screen than it is on that big wall that you're projecting it on. And the whole ITC device revolution, really, starting with the SB7 Spirit Box, going through the SB11 to any other portals. And now, speaking of going back, we're using older style equipment to make portals, to make ITC devices. So, and I know Anthony has a real expertise in sound, so he might want to comment on that a bit.
It's funny because a lot of the portals or so-called portals that people use, the amplifier and guitar pedal setup, it lends itself really well, I think, to what we're looking for. If you listen to the human voice and what we're looking for, and it happens in a specific sound spectrum, and that actually falls right in line with the frequencies that guitars come through. So you're already using equipment that's specialized to promote those frequencies. So you're going through a guitar amp, you're going through guitar pedals. They happen through those same frequencies. And the thing I like about the portals is, spirit boxes can get very noisy. when you have something like a portal where you can adjust the noise gate, which is a device on there that only lets in sounds that happen over a certain volume threshold, when you have that dialed in to filter out the noise and just get the bits and pieces of sound that you want, and then you have that running through a reverb pedal that just basically makes it sound like it's going through a giant locker room, but that reverb actually enhances the sound and makes those sounds, those responses, sound so much clearer.
Are you talking about the fact that Anthony and I were in church this morning?
Ooh. And then it goes into an amplifier that's made to enhance those frequencies and just makes things so much easier to hear.
Talking about recently, the cost of these things is astronomical. Really.
Oh, yes. It's insane.
You can spend $800 on one of these portals easily.
Yeah, and well, the geoports are in the thousands, you know? I mean, I was only able to justify me building my portal because it's like, hey, you know what? I spent more money on guitar equipment. You know, now that people have been kind of understanding how they operate, they've been able to make them more affordable, and there have been more options available to people.
We have a great benefit having somebody like Anthony and some of our other investigators who understand the nuts and bolts of the technology. So, yes, I'm a techie person, but an end user techie. I love tech. I love all that kind of stuff. But there's being comfortable with technology, and then there's understanding how the technology, the internal guts, how they react to what we're doing. Somebody like Anthony, I mean, Jennie can attest to this, we really rely on when we're picking up a piece of equipment or we're buying team tech or something like that. Anthony really does the research and his homework, and he understands looking at the specs, like what we're going to be getting out of that, whether it's something that may not lend to the product that we're trying to get at when we investigate. I'll give an example. Early on in my investigation, experience, you only kind of know what you're learning at first, from other investigators. And if you're going with like a tour group, you're only learning from the technology that they're presenting to you as the new investigator. So like something like the Phasma box, and Anthony and Jennie can attest, like I love the Phasma box, right? But we did investigations, and when somebody like Anthony says, but Frankie, I really don't know how it works. I'm not comfortable, utilizing that as something where I can walk away feeling like that was honest and true evidence that we got. So when somebody like Anthony says that to me, I take that like really serious.
Why so serious?
So when he says I would recommend more of like a spirit box piece of technology, I can understand it, and I can understand how things are, manipulated or not manipulated. That's super important to me. Because like Jennie said, this tech is not cheap. So I don't want to buy tech that is super expensive, but it's not yielding credible, valid evidence.
Right.
Exactly. And it's not user friendly sometimes. Like, for example, let's talk about the Boo Buddy that no one likes. Right? It was the greatest idea, right? It was a wonderful idea. But then it just kept going off with false positives, and it just kept saying phrases over and over again.
It's cold in here. The tickle.
And you were like, okay, let's turn that thing off, kind of thing. It got annoying and people didn't use it anymore. So it has to be user friendly.
Yeah. But something like that, like the Boo Buddy, let's just talk about. It's geared to trying to connect with like maybe like a childlike situation, right? But you can revert to take that concept and revert it back to old stuff where you're just bringing like a trigger object. Maybe it's
a teddy bear,
like a Tonka truck, or a doll, or a teddy bear, like Jennie was saying, like an actual physical one may yield it may yield a result that, I mean, if I was a child, right, living or dead, and I see this teddy bear talking to me, I probably would
that
not
would be scary.
I would not gravitate towards it. I probably would like move away because it's so far, like, it's so weird. But if somebody like Jennie or Anthony, and I'm the childlike spirit, presents to me a teddy bear where I feel like I can connect to that, I'm going to gravitate towards that. I think a lot of the high tech works based on old school technology. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could combine new technology with a trigger object that's old. So say you put the teddy bear there, and then you have a digital recorder, you have a spirit box, something like that you're using with it.
Right.
But you're combining it without putting it inside of it, and having it say, is it getting warm in here every 5 seconds?
Right.
Well, just like Frankie was saying, he's like, if I were a kid and there was a talking teddy bear, it would probably scare the hell out of me. Everyone remembers when like Teddy Ruxpin came out and they were really cool.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
All of 2 months or so, and then all of a sudden all the kids started getting scared because they started talking to them at weird times.
Right.
Yeah, it's like Chucky. It's awful.
Yeah.
Right. It's like Tickle Me Elmo. It's, to me, even as an adult, it's not like friendly to me.
No, that's not a fun toy.
It's kind of creepy, and
You shouldn't have said that, Frankie. You shouldn't have said that.
I'm gonna get all bad kind of feedback and
You are
comments
gonna
because I
tickle
like
me Elmo.
it's the Tickle Me Elmo. Okay, you do not have to leave negative comments. I have no prejudice against any talking animated anything. Okay.
Next time we have an overnight, you might find a Tickle Me Elmo next week.
but it's just a super interesting topic for me because and especially the more that you jump in, like how we were saying, don't try this at home, right? So but the more that you kind of, as an investigator, I think what we do well is, in addition to like paranormal, like our own paranormal research that we do a lot of historical, not only in the locations, but just in the field of paranormal research. And I think we do that very well, where we all bring different knowledge of how things worked in the past and how we can move it forward into like the future of things. I think that is why we get some of the good experiences that we do, because we can pivot. I think we do a really good job of it when we're at an investigation, pivoting.
Pivot! 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 Pivot!
Knowing the environment and what, like Anthony said, like what tools we need to pull out. You can't force things. I think a lot of teams go out there and they're like very rigid in their approach, saying like, we're using this and you have to respond. And if you don't respond, we're going to get aggressive. We're going to like, you know what I mean? Like forcing them to respond to what you're pulling out. And I think that's what kind of like backs off the entities in a location. People like, you have all these gizmos and gadgets. I have no idea what that is. I'm not even kind of like, I'm not even going to approach you.
I always go back to like my crowded bar analogy, you want to go to a crowded bar and make friends, or a crowded space and make friends. You're not going to make friends by going in there and starting to yell at people. If you want to try to make friends and like you want to be funny or something and you start telling the wrong jokes, then it's like, all right, you know what? Let me switch gears. Let me not tell those jokes. Or the same thing. You're trying to communicate. Not everything is going to work the same way every time. You're not going to always get the same results. As an investigator, you have to understand that. You have to understand that you have to take different approaches and you have to know when to pivot.
You have to sense it. I think that's the word. Like you have to sense that something isn't working and why and what you might want to try, because you also don't want to just keep pulling things out. Like the spirit box didn't work. We're going to go to this. We're going to go to this. We're going to try the K2. Now we're going to try this. It's not that. You're not just pivoting to change. You're pivoting because you think, this might work better because of this, because we know the history, because, we're putting ourselves in the same situation that person was in, something like that. We're adding that sense. And I think that we could really nicely lead into talking about building your own technology right now, because we were talking again about, if it doesn't work, what can we make work? Or Anthony understanding how it's built really so it would work better for our purposes.
Right.
So I know Anthony has built an incredible EMPT box.
On the front, there's a digital display for your temperature. Up top, we have 4 LED lights. On the back, there is a retractable antenna that could be repositioned. It could also be removed. And there's also the temperature probe right here. On the side of the box, we have our on-off switch. So let's turn this on so you can see what it does. All right, the box is now on. There you go. There's the temperature display doing its thing. Up top now, if I try to touch this antenna, there you go.
And I would love to feature that here right now, here and now, because I am the proud owner of one. Frankie is the proud owner of the original one, and he never lets us forget it, that he has the OG EMPT box from Anthony. Mine is black, so it's a badass. But Anthony, yeah, if you could just talk about that great piece of equipment and how it works, I would love that.
Thank you for the praise, first off. Yeah, EMPT box. Yeah. The name is an acronym. It stands for Electromagnetic Proximity and Temperature Box. And when you kind of spell it out, it's just easier to say sometimes, like empty box. You know, a lot of the technology that we use is recycled technology or repurposed technology. Mm-hmm. And I think that in terms of the actual tech in the boxes that I build, it's not something that's necessarily new. It's very much like a certain device that's floating around that falls under another acronym. But what I did differently is I looked at what was out there and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to use this device as some form of communication, I got to make it look approachable. I got to make it look attractive. I don't want it to look like, you know, this little plastic box with a bunch of lights and kind of this confusing item. I wanted it to look familiar. So I started with like using these little handmade wooden boxes and I put a nice stain on them. I make them look attractive so that it can look like, let's say, like a jewelry box or a music box or just an ornate wooden box. Then I started moving on. I started playing with different types of antennas and things like that. And I got in touch with a good friend of mine who's more into using more metaphysical tools, going back to like the old school methods of dowsing rods and pendulums and crystals. And after I built Frankie's, I got more ideas and I started working on Jennie's because she wanted one. And my friend had suggested, why don't you incorporate some type of quartz crystal in there? Because quartz is known to be a very powerful crystal and it's known to facilitate communication, which is why I intended on making that box is as a communication tool, and I incorporated a piece of quartz in with some copper and made an antenna out of that for Jennie's box, and they both work really well. And I think that's less due to the technology itself and more it's more due to the intent that I put into making them.
Right.
And I think that goes a long way with technology, like things that are produced on an assembly line. Yeah, you know what? That stuff works and it works well. But now when you have something that's made by someone's own two hands and they put the intent into it, that just drives home the point even more.
And I think Anthony does a good job of trying to push us as investigators to feel comfortable where try building your own tech. Try building it.
Yeah.
You know, the worst he always says to me, like, I'm very fearful of it. He's like, the worst thing that it's going to do is not going to work. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to cause any harm. So, like, you know.
And if it doesn't work, it's a learning experience. All right, where did I go wrong? How am I going to make this work more betterer, basically?
Right.
You did push me. I did build a small Tesla coil recently.
Awesome.
And science is my thing. Physics, chemistry, I love it. And I did burn myself about 50 times. But other than that, it's like a 5th grade science project. So I was like swearing, doing it, going, I know a 10-year-old could do this, but I keep burning myself. You know, Band-Aids everywhere. It was terrible. But, you know, and I'm learning from that. You know, I wasn't building it just because it's sexy. And I use that word a lot. Like, you know, I wasn't building it just because it looks cool when you put music through it and it spins around and, you know, makes light.
Right.
But I was really looking to amplify something. And so far, all I'm doing is overheating my spirit box. But that's a learning experience. Again, like I'm willing to say, like I make mistakes. I learn from them. We have to try these things. And then we adjust. And I have somebody like Anthony I can go to and say, hey, I'm going to blow up my spirit box with this Tesla coil. What can I do? You know?
But isn't it fascinating, Jennie, that we have somebody like Anthony that is super techie that way, but then in the drop of a dime will pull out like dowsing rods. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, definitely. I mean, he's the whole package. Absolutely. And I know you all wish you knew him better, but
He's
it's
ours.
going to remain the mystery.
He's
Yeah.
ours.
Yeah,
He's ours.
That's the real reason we don't tell you who he is.
That's good.
He's super valuable to you.
Right.
I was thinking, how do I amplify something? And put the intent in is a great example, the crystal, because it was to the extent that Anthony had me choose the crystal, gave me 4 choices and said, what do you feel? And feel is not a big word with me, as you guys know.
Right.
Like I'm a thinker. I mean, I'm a feeler in life, but in paranormal investigations, I'm all about thinking.
Right.
So it was hard for me. I had to really walk away and just kind of look and say that one, because I don't have that intuition that some of our investigators have.
It's a matter of personalizing it for you. It's
Yeah.
not something that I'm making, but it makes it yours. It puts a piece of your intention into it. I didn't even give it too much thought until I was talking to my friend who recommended them. She has a shop, and we were on a video call, and she was like having me pick out crystals. And there was one that I really liked, and it kind of looked like a bunch of the other ones. And then when my package came in at 5 or 6 crystals or 7 or 8 crystals or whatever it was, as I opened the package and I emptied the bag of crystals out into my hand, right then and there I spotted the one that I picked out in the video call.
Right.
And I was like, there might be something to this now.
Really of intent. Another layer of intent to put on top of it. So
Yes.
we love layers of evidence. We love layers of intention. Without further ado, we should really get into talking about a fabulous investigation at Kreischer Mansion, located in Staten Island, New York. Just a little bit about Kreischer Mansion. It was built in the late 1880s by an immigrant, a Bavarian immigrant. Balthasar Kreischer was his name. He had 2 sons, Charles and Edward, and he actually built them identical mansions on something that was actually called Kreischer Hill. That's how influential they were in this community. They owned a factory right across the street. Unfortunately, experienced some tragedy in that Edward committed suicide by gunshot in 1894. Brother, being so bereaved and upset by this, he held some seances trying to reach his brother. And many believe that was really how this portal opened. If you're someone who thinks about portals, who believes in portals, some people believe that some kind of a tragedy like that, or opening a seance and not knowing what we're doing, just like we were talking about before. If you don't know what you're doing and you open up a portal through a seance and don't close it, the reports of activity are really things like being touched, being stabbed, apparitions in the basement, on the 2nd floor. And in this case, we have a 2005 mafia murder. Robert McKelvey was drowned in the reflecting pool and unfortunately was dismembered, and his body was burned in the furnace in the basement. It sounds like a movie, but it really happened, and it was investigated by the FBI. And our first example of evidence is one of the most stunning that I've seen in all the time I've been investigating. And this is me and Shannon, one of our investigators, watching the light show, the incredible light show of this box. Enjoy.
Thank you. Strong. Thank you.
Paranormal light show.
That's great.
It was incredible.
Oh, you really like the light, huh? Yeah. It's fun.
It went on for quite some time, and I have some equipment that's similar. The one we didn't name before, that sometimes needs to be reset and it goes off by itself, and I don't always trust it. But
Right.
I have never had this equipment go off, so it was pretty fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Same. Like
But-
if I have the equipment that we're not naming, right?
Right.
And these two and Anthony's EMPT box in the room, of course, separate from each other, the chances that I'm going to get hits from something, it usually will come from Anthony's EMPT box.
Right.
And if the other device goes off, I'm a little less inclined to think that it's actual activity and not the device picking up something wonky in the room. When we talk about the credibility of things, I will always kind of like go to, if they're sitting side by side and it's a custom piece of equipment, I'm probably going with the custom piece of equipment just because I connect to it more, I guess. I don't know. And I have more trust. We talked about trust, in the beginning. Like, I trust in that custom piece of equipment a little bit more than I do the other manufactured pieces of equipment.
What I love also is that this is an 1880s mansion. So we talked about it looking like a jewel box or something like that. So when I put that on the mantle, it didn't look like some type of high-tech thing. It looked like, a jewel box or a music box, really. And who wouldn't go near that? If I were lady of the home, I might think, oh, how beautiful that crystal is on top of there.
Right.
And touch it, rather than I'm afraid of that type thing.
Right.
Which is what I think actually is a plausible explanation. So thank you, Anthony.
No problem. I'm glad it worked. I couldn't even believe it when you sent me the video. I was like, okay, I did something right. It works.
It works.
It does. It absolutely does.
We may get tons of requests for EMPT boxes.
I was just going to say.
Right.
Just know that they are custom made. So if Anthony does, offer you the opportunity to get one, just know that they are custom made. So when Anthony's custom building, we work on Anthony's time. So
that's right, because he's an international spy in the other site. So he needs time to get back from his missions.
Cue the James Bond theme.
Well, the final thing about that clip is that it is actually in response to me, and it did not go off at any other time. And we did have our other equipment that's similar that we don't name going off constantly because of the temperature. It was windy. The windows were rattling. It was really rough conditions inside. The wind was crazy. So we had to kind of eliminate anything to do with wind or temperature. It just was so cold. It was freezing. So that was another great thing about using that tool rather than the other one.
I guess I will lead us into this next clip. Like Jenny was saying, it actually was like snowing. We had a snowstorm that day, and the conditions were rough. It's on a hilly type of situation in Staten Island, and so the winds were kicking up like really bad there. So this clip is of me and two investigators. I believe this is actually in the parlor room. What you're going to be looking through is a very large, huge wall-size mirror, and it actually picked up something very funny. So right there, what happened was the wind, like Jenny was saying, blew the front doors open, and I was standing right there and legitimately like scared the shit out of me. But the other two investigators came out to see what was going on, and in the reflection of the mirror, you see you can tell the lights are off. So the brightness that you're seeing is from the IR from the camera, but in the video, and I'll wind it back a little bit, you see the light bulb that's obviously it's turned off, give a quick flash, letting us know that something was there, whether it was responding to like, haha, I gotcha, something. It was like an immediate reaction to me reacting to the doors being blown open. So there you see the flash, and not noticed. We were so kind of like wrapped up in the moment of the doors being blown open to like something being caught. And I think this is a good example too of where like the high tech kind of comes in. Something like a camera that is rolling, and we're kind of distracted by something else that's going on in the space. We may be picking up something that we totally are not either paying attention or we don't see until later on, until we're doing our footage review.
That was really interesting.
Right.
Were you able to debunk the doors opening?
Yeah, so the doors were, there's two entryways to kind of get into Kreischer Mansion, and there's like a side kind of like service entry that we kind of all went in that day. Then there's two huge wooden doors. The wind was just so strong that it was, the doors is actually like a plank of wood that kind of like old school kind of like shuts it from inside. And that had, how we debunked it was that had gotten loose from, I guess, the rattling of the doors and the wind. So it wasn't secured. So a strong gust of wind kind of came through because, like I said, we were investigating like snowstorm. So
right, it's like a horror movie.
Right, it blew open.
Open.
Legit, I was standing right there, so when it blew open, it was like almost like on cue. Part of me is saying, like, was that the house distracting me from some other way of them communicating? I don't know. Like, I debunk it because of the wind that the doors blew open, but something distract us from that light kind of going off or letting us know, like, maybe it was them that opened the door and they're giving us a secondary, like, yeah that was me, like an acknowledgement. But there was no way that I could debunk the light going off because lights were out. It was dark.
Exactly. And we should mention that we always try, if you hadn't joined us earlier, we always try to debunk everything as much as possible. We try to think of everything humanly possible that it could be. Especially me, I'll speak for myself, because I start out doubting everything. Right. And it needs to be proven to me. Yeah, that was pretty crazy night. I really think that lent to the whole experience. I think that's part of it. You have a great experience when you have this, haunted mansion and it's raining or it's, snowing and windy and the windows are rattling and it's the whole atmosphere. And let's face it, we do that for fun. We do this for fun too. The basement area of Kreischer is where the furnace is located that I spoke of before, with unfortunately where Mr. McKelvey was disposed of by the mob. And so I was definitely interested in going down there. I know that I had a lot of activity. In this clip, you'll see our investigators Paul and Julie and Frankie are you doing an Estes session here, correct?
Yes. Yeah, so Paul and I are in one area of the basement, kind of facing where like the existing furnace is that they replaced with the old furnace, and Julie's off into the distance with you. She's off camera. You can't see. We went over like what an Estes method is in our first episode. So she's blindfolded, has noise canceling headphones on, connected to the spirit box. So we're asking a series of questions and she's answering.
Why did you just find me? They took your body? Baby, did you say you satisfied me? Yes. I'm not making a joke, Robert. I don't want this is very serious. I kind of get a little excited when I hear somebody communicating. So, Robert, I was talking to Craig, and Craig was telling me that you were really a nice guy, and you were really trying to get your life situated, and you ran into, like, a really bad situation. That we understand that your life was tragically taken from you. But the only way we can do that is if you give us some type of sign. Yeah. Now, we know when Jennie and Stacy and Shannon were down here, whoever spirits were down here, let off. Light it up. Light it up. Yes, we want you to light up. Any of these items. Great technology.
Like you would say, what do you think? Or yup, she'd answer immediately.
Right.
Or when you laughed and it said laughter, it was so instant. And how did you feel about that?
It was probably one of the most interesting ST sessions I've been in thus far because intelligent responses. Like we were like legitimately asking questions and getting a response. I mean, there's one point where I say like I get like jazzed up because I'm getting a response. So like I started to laugh for whatever reason, why, and it said laughter, so it knew we were there. I can attest for those out there that are skeptics and saying, well, how maybe she can hear you. She was kind of like off into the distance. The basement's pretty large. And we were not like shouting the question. The likelihood that she was hearing us, and it goes back to that trust. We trusted in her that she was legitimately getting this information through the way that the method is supposed to work. And that's communications through a device like a spirit box to respond. So this is a very interesting layer of what we do and what Jenny was talking about because of the fact that we went down there with information from other investigators that were down there before us. And when we can get responses like we get through an ST session, it also validates what the experience or the reports that are coming from investigators that are in that area prior to us being down there. So Jenny, why don't you tell us what we're going to look at here?
Correct, exactly. And sometimes, just a quick note, sometimes we say, don't tell me what happened down there. I want to experience it for myself. And sometimes we say, yeah, give me a little bit, of information about what happened. Again, this is the basic
context. It's context.
Exactly. We get some context, but we don't always want to know because we want to keep it, not tainted is the best way to say it. Yeah. Because you're going to be expecting it in a certain area. This is again the basement at Kreischer Mansion. It's Frankie mentioned it's large. It's not enormous.
Right.
And it's not really overloaded with stuff. There is one closet in the back that they have some things in, but the rest of it, there's just a big open freezer, a walk-in freezer or refrigerator, I believe.
Yes.
And it's pretty empty. So there's not a lot of items. You see a couple wooden, ladder or something against the wall. It's not really crowded. This is me and Shannon. And throughout the evening that when we were down there, we were asking for responses, and we did get little knocks, little sounds. We saw some of our sensor lights go off. It was almost like we were surrounded by something. And then I finally was getting a little bit frustrated, honestly, with the sound of the furnace, which was quite loud. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hear anything down here. And I say, you're going to have to make it loud. If you want us to hear you, you're going to have to do something loud. And boy, did we get something loud, to the point where, it really made us jump, which we don't jump a lot as investigators. We're kind of, cool. We're kind of cool. And boy, it like right to my heart, it really was quite loud. And it doesn't even do it justice in the video because keep in mind, the furnace was running so loudly in the background. But we also have a sensor light placed in the area of the sound, which does go off. So you'll notice that the sensor light goes off as well. It's a pink color.
We'd just like to know you're here with us. Excellent. Thank you so much.
So you can see that light right there light up. That is a sensor right in the area. And after a long time of trying to debunk that noise, because again, it's hard to explain how loud that was. And we had to be, a couple meters from it at max. We pulled the wood off the wall and let it drop like a plywood really loudly against the wall. And that's the best we could really do to make that degree of noise.
Right.
It was startling. It was really startling. You get knocks, you get taps. But this was like bang, really, really loud.
And I think the great thing about Kreischer was we go to some places and it could be residual activity, heavy residual activity, which we'll talk about that in the next episode, like the difference between residual kind of
It was intelligent, very intelligent.
Right, very intelligent. You saw it with the example with the light bulb flashing off, giving acknowledgement that almost like in a comical way, like, hey, You got scared. I acknowledged it. We saw it with Jennie asking for a knock or a bang, but Jennie basically said to the entities, you have to make it loud because I need to hear it. And it responded in that way. It wasn't just like a nice little knock or tap. It responded the way that Jennie was asking it to be responding to her, which lends to it being
yes. And for those skeptics out there, I love you because I am one. I love that. We thought, is an animal in the basement? We thought of everything. We went back there and literally there's nothing except that piece of plywood against the wall and the refrigerator. So I couldn't figure out what made that crash. I was very frustrated by it because I thought, I have to throw this out if something fell. If something's on the ground, it could have fallen on its own kind of thing, but it mystified me. And I did. I looked for cats. We thought we saw a cat earlier. So I looked for cats. I looked for raccoons, squirrels. It was a cold night. It was breezy, windy, but this was a huge piece of plywood that could not have been blown over. And it didn't get blown over. It was still there against the wall. So
Right. And
it was like someone banged on it, like really hard.
And I love the fact that we, as a team, kind of like could validate each other's experiences. While they were different, we can just commonly connect and validate for each other that there was activity down there, which sometimes we go into locations and the other one team, we split up in micro teams. One team will get activity and the other team may go down there and it may be super quiet. But these were spaces that we were working in Kreischer that the activity didn't stop just because a different team was down there or ate the parlor or something. So that was super fascinating to me that we could share our experiences in various rooms of the mansion and acknowledge that there's the activity exists. So I think this was like a super good way of different techniques that were used to furnish a response from the entities.
And you have the sensor light as well, talking about layers.
Right.
The sensor light go off at the same time, which is interesting, which made me think animal, but no animals, nothing. So.
And sometimes you just can't debunk it. Like
unexplained. I know, as much as I want to, Frankie, as much as I want to, every single time. Yeah, this didn't happen. So
this is actually, I'm glad Jennie brought this clip up because this is me, an investigator Paul, and investigator Julie. Julie's behind the bar, and what we're trying to do is we're just trying to welcome and make it a warm space for some of the spirits in the room to communicate. So we have shot glasses out, we have some alcohol bottles on the bar, and we're pretending like we're just having a casual conversation. We're talking about layers of tech. So we have things like K2 meters on the bar. We have a Phasma box running. We also have Spirit box. So we have a bunch of different things to kind of like let the spirits communicate however they want.
How many spirits are in the room? There's a lot. Wow.
And that was such a neat response. We could validate for each other, you know what I mean? That intelligent response that we kept getting was just amazing, you know, and it was an awesome thing to share like with each other. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes things happen to you as an individual, as an investigator, but when you can share it with your team and you're like, you could hear us saying, and we're like a lot, like it was very clear to us. So the intelligent response, very beneficial for us because we then know, like when we're doing like a return, how we can approach things. We know now that it's a place where we can do some of this question and answer stuff and it not be a residual kind of experience or activity in the room. We can utilize some of that technology. We can utilize some of that old and new and actually get like an intelligent response, which is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
It's true. We talk about not reading into intent of an entity or, you know, taking a voice that sounds gruff or mean or, you know, people say evil, but it's really just the way it sounds. And we try not to assign any kind of characteristic to it.
Right.
But in this case, you all immediately were like, Allah. Like, it was kind of funny. Like, if somebody was being a wise guy a little bit. You know, like, I don't even know how many spirits are in this room, but it's a lot, you know, kind of thing. And you kind of could read into it a little bit there. Do you think?
Right. No, and I think that the way that they were saying it, like, a lot, like, we were just like,
no idea.
And it validated also that information that we get from the location, the caretakers of the location, from the history that you can kind of pull up from the historical societies and online and all that. There was a lot of activity. There was a lot of information going from the Kreischers to the incident that happened in the 2000s. You have a different almost way of communicating. So they had a different way in the Kreischer era, and we were getting those type of responses, but we were also getting some very intelligent responses from Robert, who is the gentleman that, the victim, and in a more modern era, you know, like
very modern.
It was just super fascinating. Kreischer is one of those places, I think, that, you know, I know Jennie, this was like on her bucket list, and I'm glad it was active. We want people to have very passionate feelings for a location or even in a private client, because I think that draws the energy. Even though you're a skeptic, Jennie, I think that you having that passion, like when you walked in there, you're automatically like kind of like a light, because they know that you're wanting to get the information.
And just pulling up to that mansion in that ice storm, really, and I took a photograph of it that night. That was so eerie. People thought, what did you use, like a filter or something? And I said, no, it was just literally the way it looked.
Right.
It was so creepy. That was your classic haunted mansion kind of thing. And
we often say, like, when we have a really good experience at a location, like, we just scratch the surface. I think a lot of the times and I think, you know, we just scratched the surface of the different layers that kind of come up at Kreischer. It was just a phenomenal experience. So in this clip, we're still down in the basement. Paul, myself, and Julie again is still doing the Estes method, but we wanted to kind of make it a little bit more personal. Me being a social worker, I really want to tap into some of the trauma that Robert experienced in that location, especially down in the basement, where kind of is his like final resting place, unfortunately. So I really wanted to get a little bit more intimate with Robert, since he was communicating with us through Julie via the Estes method.
Does it get frustrating having people constantly ask you what happened? Because I can see how that can be a little frustrating. Relive things over and over again. You like to play cards? See, there's some cards down here. Pictures, yes. I'm sitting right in front of the picture of some really bad men. You know who those pictures are? They're bad. Yes, they are very bad. There's more. More of them? That's the second time she said it. There's more than one. So there's more than just these guys that are down here in these pictures? Over time.
That's incredible. So the thing I want to point out about this clip is that we do, as we always say, a lot of research. Research is huge to every really paranormal research group. But Shannon, one of our investigators, she put together this board with the primary people involved in the murder in 2005 of Robert McKelvey. For example, the man on the top left is evidently the person they think actually did murder him, the actual assassin, if you will. So we put those in the basement earlier, actually, as sort of a trigger to get to speak with Robert. And Frankie here is pulling out some playing cards. And it's interesting to me that right away he says pictures, which is so astounding. I mean, it's so intelligent, because you literally put them on the pictures.
Right. And I
And
literally.
he's guiding the conversation. Do you feel that he was kind of guiding the conversation towards the pictures, away from the cards?
Yes, because it was almost like you talk about like connection. Like I'm literally sitting on the floor and I really wanted to get intimate with him. I really wanted to, since we knew in the beginning stages of doing the essays that he was there and we were getting an intelligent response. I literally wanted to tap into just, and Jenny says it, like the person, almost have like a session with him where he can tell us how this makes him feel, how the experience is with investigators coming in and asking all these sometimes evasive questions because they know of the tragedy. But I really wanted to get to know the person. We were told that he liked to play cards, so we whipped out cards. We really were, talking about, from one of the caretakers was telling us that his death was so unfortunate because he was trying to like pull his life together in a different direction, that we kind of wanted to tap into that as well. Like, we acknowledge the fact that you were trying to do something different with your life, but the result was horrifying. So, and if you can see, there's 2K2 meters on the top of the picture or of the image that you're looking at, the two black squares that were K2 meters. And you don't see it in the video, but they actually were spiking as we were talking to Robert and getting responses from Julie. So if you, again, the layers of what we do. And I think Shannon is one of our great investigators that really will put time and effort into the details of learning the history. So she really jumps in and does her homework. And then we always will get pictures or something that's very intimate to who we're trying to connect with.
Exactly. And, bringing up that you're a social worker, I think it's very easy for groups to go in and focus on the sordid details. He was lured to his death. He was murdered and, and dismembered. It's very sordid. But really, again, and I'll bring it back to that, we're dealing with someone who walked the earth as a human being, and we need to be understanding of that, and who had good points and bad points, just like all of us. And nobody deserves that kind of thing.
No.
So,
and I think that's,
you have to have the empathy, right? I mean, like, you're a social worker, you have to have empathy.
Right. And most of the, like, believe it or not, I mean, most of the places that we investigate, there is significant amount of trauma and that's probably why we're there and why they're there and stuck in that situation, because there is trauma there. So this was, a really good way, again, of us showing examples of different types of approaches, and those pictures were a piece of technology in their own way. Sometimes it takes that to, I almost feel, Jenny, like he knew what our intentions were when we had everybody's picture. We didn't just have his, we had like the whole, everybody who was supposedly involved in it. And it was interesting also that we were getting responses like there were more than what the story, it was just wonder. It actually just even gives me the chills because of the fact that he was giving maybe us a piece of information that could possibly, open up a different conversation about what happened to him. So,
who knows? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's a mystery. It's really, that's part of this, is diving into the mystery, really.
Right.
So I've included one EVP here in the evidence. It is something that I actually caught without asking a question. We're just simply setting up for an EVP session in the front parlor. It's Stacy and Shannon and myself. And we're just talking after we played some German folk music, and we thought that might bring out, the Kreischers. Hey, come join us. We're playing some German folk music. I asked some questions in German, and we were just setting up the EVP session, sitting down, setting up the recorder and everything. And you'll hear me just talking in the background, and you'll hear a gentleman speak loudly, and there are no men on the floor or even anywhere near us. It's only the three women. And you guys tell me what you hear. Tell me what you think you hear. So right there, you hear some type of male voice. The word I hear is, I immediately heard something that ended like an NG, and I hear going. Going. Something like that. It could be something else. If someone thinks it's something else, we'd love to hear your thoughts. But I sent it to a few of our investigators, and everyone heard going. Quite a loud voice, and it does sound to me like a human voice, not some type of piano key or something. There was a piano there. We tried every key after that, just to see how they would sound in case we did hear anything later on. We wanted to know what the piano sounded like. So it's not just debunking, it's pre-bunking, I call it. Like, that's going to make this noise. That window is going to rattle, that type of thing. It's going to set off the equipment. That's what I call pre-bunking. I always look right away to see, okay, what's going to sound paranormal or look paranormal that is not going to be paranormal.
Right. You have to read the room before, especially in a place like that, where, like, I think we were doing a pretty good job of understanding that there were elements involved that were going to affect the house, creaking, windows rattling, things like that, that if you're like not doing what Jenny said and pre-bunking and understanding like that's happening in the room while you're investigating, it could be very easy to get caught up in that and think that it's actual paranormal activity. A good thing for investigators, if you're going out and investigating, know the space. That's why it's very important when we first get to a location, chances are we're getting some type of, from the caretakers, a tour around the building or the location. And oftentimes we will pull each other aside and say, hey, like, mental note, this is what's going on in the room, or this is what I see that could potentially be something that can taint the evidence. So when we go out and we do break into micro teams, we understand that there's that element that we have to be mindful of, especially if it's stuff that you're getting like on an EVP recorder or video. Like all the time we joke about orbs, right? We joke about how...
We do joke about orbs, Frankie. We do joke about orbs.
It's not to say that it's not valid for some people, but that's where technology, the high tech, if we're going back to that conversation, you have to be mindful of those things. You have to be mindful if you're running any type of video equipment, you're going to get like dust particles, insects, just light fractal anomalies that have maybe nothing to do with paranormal. But when you're looking back at the evidence, it looks like something may possibly be in the room, but it's just, you have to understand, like, if you're in an old place, chances are it's the dust particle because it's very dusty, very, especially like at a place like Kreischer where there's a lot of drafts coming in through the windows. It could kick up like dust and it's going to portray in like a video that it is some type of like weird anomaly. Right.
Exactly. Again, animal scratching in the attic. You have to look at everything in the walkthrough. Right. Absolutely. Chimes, and I heard a lot of whistling that could have really sounded like a human whistle, but it was the windows at Kreischer. Right. And when in doubt, throw it out. That's something everybody says, but it's because it's a good thing to say.
Right.
So thanks everybody for tuning in today to part 2 of the Parasite podcast. Make sure you tune into episode 3. We're going to be discussing the difference between intelligent hauntings and residual hauntings. Be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and bell notifications so you can get up-to-date notifications on all of our upcoming episode releases. Our next case file for review is going to be the Ritz Theater Company in Haddon Township, New Jersey. An exquisitely beautiful place and a super interesting investigation. Don't miss it. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye guys.
See you next time, everyone.
Bye.
See you next time.